Hyung Park had stopped counting the seconds people could look at him before they turned away. 3, maybe 4 on a good day. Less if he caught them off guard. Less still if they were afraid, which most people were, though rarely for the reasons they thought. They feared the scars, the reputation, the rumors of what he'd done in Seoul's darkest corners. They never feared the truth, that beneath the monster they'd created, there was still a man desperate enough to bleed out in a stranger's hands just to feel human again. At 34, he controlled half the city's criminal operations. Protection rackets, smuggling routes, political leverage that made prosecutors nervous and politicians pliable. His word was law in districts the police had abandoned. But power didn't make him human. Not in the ways that mattered. They called him other things too. Seoul's monster. The man who should have died. Those who dealt with him directly knew better. He wasn't cruel for pleasure. Wasn't loud or theatrical. He was efficient, emotionless, and utterly unreachable. The kind of man who didn't waste words on threats because his presence was warning enough. And then there was his face. The scars covered the left side from temple to jaw. Melted skin pulled tight in ridges that caught shadows and made strangers look away. A childhood fire. His father's cigarette, a bottle of soju, rage that turned their apartment into an inferno. Hyung had been 7. He'd been a normal boy once. Quick to smile, eager to please, the kind of child teachers remembered fondly. The fire changed everything. First, the way strangers recoiled. Then, the way his own reflection became a stranger. Then, the way he learned that survival and belonging were mutually exclusive. Women still approached occasionally. Money attracted attention even when humanity didn't. But their eyes would slide past his scars, focusing on his suit, his car, the power he represented. Every touch felt like negotiation. Every smile like strategy. He'd learned to recognize the difference between desire and calculation, and he'd stopped pretending there was a third option. So he built walls instead. An empire constructed from fear and distance, where no one got close enough to hurt him, because no one got close at all. Until the night a knife found the space between his ribs, and blood loss made him careless enough to end up in a public emergency room. Wounded, exposed, and about to meet the only person in 10 years who would look directly at his ruined face and ask him where it hurt. Tiny favor, if this is hitting different, show some love with a like and subscribe. It's instant and pushes this to people who need it. Thanks. Now back to the story. The private club smelled like expensive cigars and cheaper fear. Hyung Park moved through the smoke-thick room like a blade through water. Conversations parting, laughter dying, men in $1,000 suits suddenly fascinated by their drinks. The club belonged to him, technically. Everything in this district did. But ownership didn't make him welcome. He took his usual corner booth, the one that faced the entrance. Old habit, the kind that kept you alive. His lieutenant, Min Jae, slid into the seat across from him, eyes down. The shipment cleared customs. No issues. Hyung nodded once. Min Jae had worked for him for 6 years and still couldn't hold eye contact for more than a heartbeat. Not unusual. Most men lasted 3 seconds before their gaze skittered away. To his shoulder, the wall, anywhere but the scarred ruin of his face. He'd stopped taking it personally around year 2. The Busan crew? Hyung asked, pushing back on territory lines. Nothing serious yet. Make it stay that way. Min Jae left quickly, relief visible in his shoulders. Hyung sat alone, nursing whiskey he wouldn't finish, watching his empire run itself through fear and habit. This was power. Silent rooms and averted eyes. Loyalty bought with terror and paid in blood. He told himself it was enough. The memories came anyway, uninvited. Smoke and screaming. His mother's voice, high and desperate. The apartment building stairwell, flames climbing walls like living things. He'd been 7, small enough to slip through the window his mother couldn't fit through. She'd pushed him out, and he'd fallen 2 stories onto garbage bags that probably saved his life. The fire had taken her. The fall and flames had taken half his face. Sometimes, late at night, he still felt the heat. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He ignored it. It buzzed again. Then again. Hyung answered without speaking. You have a problem. The voice was young, nervous. One of his street lookouts. The South Harbor crew. They're moving on the warehouse. Now. He was already standing. How many? 8. Maybe 10. They've got. Gunfire cracked through the phone line. Hyung was out the door before the call dropped. The warehouse district was deserted at 2 a.m., which made the ambush embarrassingly obvious. Hyung saw the setup the moment his car turned the corner. Too many shadows in the wrong places, the unnatural stillness of men pretending to be empty space. He got out anyway. Arrogance or stupidity, he'd never been sure which drove him. Maybe both. Maybe he'd survived so much that death felt theoretical. They came from three sides. Professional, coordinated. The South Harbor crew didn't send amateurs. Hyung dropped the first man with an elbow to the throat, took his knife, used it on the second. Muscle memory and violence, the language he spoke most fluently. But there were too many, and he was alone, and the knife that slid between his ribs felt almost inevitable. Cold, then hot. He'd been stabbed before. This one felt deeper. He killed the man who'd done it, instinct, spite, then stumbled backward as the others scattered. Sirens in the distance. Someone had called the cops, which meant someone wanted him found. Hyung pressed his hand to his side. Blood hot and insistent, soaking through his shirt. He made it to his car. Started the engine. His vision swam. Not a hospital. Couldn't risk it. His safe house doctor would. The world tilted. When he opened his eyes, he was on the ground beside his car, phone out of reach, blood pooling beneath him in the streetlight. He tried to stand. Failed. Tried again. His driver found him there, unconscious, 20 minutes later. By then, Hyung had lost enough blood that survival required more than street medicine and silence. It required a hospital. He woke to fluorescent lights and antiseptic smell. Emergency room. Public. The worst possible place. Hyung tried to sit up, and pain detonated in his ribs. A hand pressed his shoulder down. Firm, clinical, utterly unafraid. Don't move. You've got a chest tube and 15 stitches holding your liver together. The voice was female, American accented, calm as morning. He turned his head. She was younger than he'd expected. Early 30s, dark hair tied back, brown eyes that met his without flinching. No pity. No curiosity. No disgust. Just competence. Where does it hurt? She asked. The question was so simple, so human, that for a moment Hyung forgot how to answer. She waited, pen poised over a chart, expression neutral. Everywhere, he finally said. Something flickered in her eyes. Not sympathy exactly, but recognition. Like she knew what everywhere meant. Scale of 1 to 10? 7. Liar. She made a note. I'm giving you morphine. You'll sleep. When you wake up, you'll answer questions about who stabbed you, or I'm calling the police myself. She turned to leave. Wait. She paused. Your name? Dr. Williams. She glanced back at him, and for the first time in 10 years, someone held his gaze without fear. Try not to die before morning. I hate paperwork. Then she was gone. Hyung lay in the hospital bed, chest tight with something that wasn't pain, and realized he couldn't remember the last time someone had looked at his face and seen a person worth saving. The morphine pulled him under. When he dreamed, it wasn't about fire. Chloe Williams had learned to sleep through gunfire. Not literal sleep. She was awake most nights anyway, sprawled on the office couch with case files scattered across her chest. But she'd learned to filter the sounds. Ambulance sirens, shouting from the street, the sharp crack of violence that punctuated life in Seoul's most dangerous district. She'd chosen this hospital deliberately. St. Catherine's served the patients no one else wanted, gang members, addicts, the desperately poor. It was understaffed, underfunded, and drowning in trauma cases that would have been rejected at any hospital north of the river. It was exactly what she deserved. Dr. Williams. A nurse appeared in her office doorway, nervous. We've got an incoming GSW, no stab wound. Multiple. The patients, she hesitated. He's dangerous. Chloe was already moving. They're all dangerous, Minicio. That's why they're here. She'd been at St. Catherine's for 18 months. Long enough to recognize the particular shade of fear in her staff's faces when someone truly terrifying came through their doors. Long enough to know that fear made mistakes, and mistakes killed patients. She couldn't afford mistakes. Not anymore. The ER was controlled chaos when she arrived, 3 nurses hovering at a distance, a security guard with his hand on his radio, and a man on the gurney who looked like death postponed. Chloe scanned the chart. Stab wound to the lower right chest, possible liver involvement, significant blood loss. Vitals unstable but holding. Why isn't anyone prepping him? She asked. Silence. Minicio. The nurse stepped closer, voice low. Dr. Williams, that's Hyung Park. The name meant nothing to Chloe. Minicio's eyes widened. The Hyung Park. The She made a vague gesture that encompassed violence, power, and terror. I don't care if he's the president, Chloe said flatly. Get me 2 units of O-negative and call upstairs. If his liver's torn, we're going to surgery. She moved to the gurney. The man was unconscious, face turned slightly away. Even through the blood and pallor, she could see the scars, severe burns covering the left side of his face, the kind that spoke of childhood trauma and inadequate treatment. She noted them clinically, the way she noted everything. Relevant to patient history, irrelevant to her job. Let's move, she said. The staff obeyed, fear giving way to training. Hyung woke to pain and light in that order. The ceiling was unfamiliar. Hospital, he remembered. Public. The humiliation of it settled in his chest like lead. He turned his head carefully. She was there. The doctor from before. No, not before. His memory was fractured, dreamlike. She'd spoken to him, hadn't she? Asked him something. You're awake. She approached with a tablet, movements efficient. Good. Your labs are improving. He watched her face, waiting for it. The moment her eyes would catch on his scars and skitter away. The slight tightening around her mouth. The professional mask that couldn't quite hide revulsion. It didn't come. She met his gaze directly, checking his pupils with a penlight, close enough that he could see the faint circles under her eyes, smell the coffee on her breath. The chest tube comes out tomorrow if there's no fluid accumulation, she said. You were lucky. The knife missed your liver by 2 centimeters. Doesn't feel lucky, he said. His voice was rough. Lucky's relative. She made a note. The police want to talk to you. I'm sure they do. I can stall them for 24 hours. After that, it's out of my hands. She set down the tablet. You should know that several of my staff recognized you. They're terrified. I'd appreciate it if you didn't make their fear justified. There it was, the acknowledgement of what he was. But her tone held no judgment, just practicality. Like she was asking him not to smoke in a non-smoking area. I'm not here to hurt anyone, Hyung said. Good. She turned to leave. Why aren't you afraid? The question left his mouth before he could stop it. Too revealing. Too raw. She paused, looked back. For a moment, something passed across her face. Not pity, but a kind of weary understanding. I've seen worse things than scars, she said quietly. Then softer. And I've learned that the most dangerous people usually don't end up bleeding out in emergency rooms. They're the ones who never get caught. She left before he could respond. Hyung lay in the hospital bed, chest tight with something that wasn't pain, and realized he couldn't remember the last time someone had treated him like a person instead of a problem. Chloe made it to her office before the shaking started. It wasn't fear. She'd lost the capacity for self-protective fear 2 years ago, in a different hospital, holding a different hand while someone she loved bled out from gunshot wounds she hadn't seen coming. This was something else. Recognition, maybe. The way Park had looked at her, like her lack of reaction was the most shocking thing that had happened to him all night. She'd seen his face, of course. The burns were impossible to miss. But she'd also seen the knife wound that should have killed him, the defensive cuts on his hands, the old scars beneath the new ones. She'd seen survival, not monstrosity. Scars just meant you'd lived through something. In this neighborhood, that made him like everyone else. Her phone buzzed. Another patient incoming. She pocketed it, splashed water on her face, and headed back to the ER. She had 4 more hours on her shift. Then another 6 she'd volunteer for because sleep meant dreams, and dreams meant David's face, and she'd learned it was easier to just keep moving. Behind her, in room 4, Hyung Park stared at the ceiling and replayed 3 words in his head. Where does it hurt? No one had asked him that in 10 years. No one had looked at him like the answer mattered. Something inside his chest cracked open. Not the wound, but something deeper. Something he'd thought had died in the fire with his childhood and his face and any chance of being wanted. He pressed his hand to his ribs, feeling the ache. For the first time in a decade, it felt like the pain meant he was still alive. Hyung left the hospital 3 days later, against medical advice and without giving his real name. He paid in cash, enough to cover 10 patients, and disappeared before Dr. Williams started her morning shift. Cowardice, maybe. Or self-preservation. He couldn't decide which. What he could decide was that he needed to know more about the woman who'd looked at his face and seen a person worth saving. Min Jae delivered the file 2 days later. Thin, depressingly so. Dr. Chloe Williams, 32. American-trained surgeon, Johns Hopkins. Top of her class. had turned down positions at 3 prestigious Seoul hospitals to work at St. Catherine's, a decision that made no financial sense and less career sense. Hyung flipped pages. She ran a free clinic 3 nights a week in the hospital's basement, treated anyone who walked through the door, funded it partially from her own salary, supplemented by irregular donations that barely kept the lights on. Then he found the newspaper clipping, 2 years old. American doctor's fiancé killed in gang violence. The photo showed a younger Chloe, face hollow with shock, standing outside a different hospital. The article was brief. Dr. David Chun, 29, emergency physician, caught in crossfire during a territorial dispute. Dead before the ambulance arrived. Hyung read it twice. Then he picked up his phone. "The neighborhood around St. Catherine's," he said when Min-jae answered. "I want every crew in a 5-block radius to stay out. No business, no recruiting, no presence. Anyone who breaks this rule answers to me personally. Boss, that's prime territory for. I don't care. Make it happen." Silence on the line. Then, understood. Hyung hung up and stared at Chloe's photo in the file. She was smiling in it, the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes anymore. He understood that smile. He made one more call, this time to an accountant who didn't ask questions. Set up monthly transfers to St. Catherine's free clinic. Anonymous. 50 million won to start, then 20 million monthly. Route it through enough layers that it can't be traced back. He could protect her. He just couldn't let her know. Chloe noticed the change in her 3rd week back at the clinic. The usual late-night chaos, overdoses, stab wounds, the grinding poverty that turned medical emergencies into death sentences, continued. But the violence felt different, muted somehow. Gang members still came in, but they came alone now, without the posturing and threats that used to turn her waiting room into contested territory. They were polite, apologetic even. Dr. Williams. Min-seo appeared with an envelope. This was dropped off. No name. Inside, a bank transfer confirmation. 20 million won. Chloe stared at the number. "Is this real?" "I called the bank. It cleared." It was the 3rd anonymous donation that month. Together, they were enough to keep the clinic running for 6 months. Maybe longer. "We should celebrate," Min-seo said. But Chloe was already calculating. New sutures, antibiotics, maybe even an ultrasound machine. She felt the weight lift slightly from her shoulders, then settle back down. Money didn't erase the reasons she was here. Money didn't bring David back. She saw the scarred man again on a Thursday. Chloe was leaving the convenience store near the hospital at 2 a.m., coffee and instant noodles in hand. The dinner of trauma surgeons everywhere. When she spotted him at the end of the aisle. Hyung Park. She'd learned his name after he'd left, whispered by nurses who couldn't believe she'd treated him without flinching. He was reading the label on a bottle of water with an intensity that seemed excessive for hydration choices. "Mr. Park," she said. He turned and she watched the now familiar sequence. Surprise, then the bracing for her reaction, then confusion when the reaction didn't come. "Dr. Williams." He set down the water. "How's the clinic?" "Odd question." "Busy." "How's your liver?" "Intact, thanks to you." An awkward silence stretched between them. Chloe noticed he'd positioned himself so his scarred side was turned slightly away. A habit so automatic he probably didn't realize he was doing it. "The donations," she said suddenly. "The ones coming to the clinic. Do you know anything about that?" His face gave nothing away. "Why would I?" "Because the violence stopped too. Right around the same time you walked out of my ER." She stepped closer. "My patients are terrified of you. But they're also safer than they've been in years. That's not a coincidence." Hyung met her eyes, and she saw something flicker there, caught between denial and the desperate need to be recognized. "Maybe you're just lucky," he said finally. "I don't believe in luck." "Neither do I." They stood in the fluorescent glare of the convenience store, violence and healing staring at each other across an aisle of instant ramen. "Why?" Chloe asked. "Why my clinic?" "You saved my life. That's my job." "You looked at me," he said quietly, "like I was human." The raw honesty of it punched through her professional distance. She opened her mouth to respond. To say what, she wasn't sure, when her pager went off. "Mass casualty event. All trauma surgeons report immediately." "I have to go," she said. He nodded, stepped aside to let her pass. Chloe made it to the door before she turned back. "The donations help. Whatever you're doing, thank you." She was gone before she could see the way those words hit him. Hyung returned to the clinic a week later, late enough that Chloe would be gone. He'd meant to just drive past, check the perimeter. But he found himself parking, walking to the basement entrance, watching through the window. Chloe was still there, treating a patient, an older woman who was crying. Chloe held her hand while explaining something, her face soft with a compassion that made Hyung's chest ache. People who profit from violence, Chloe was saying, voice carrying through the cracked window. They're monsters. They destroy communities, families, lives. They don't care who gets hurt as long as they maintain power. The woman nodded, still crying. David died because men like that decided a street corner was worth more than human life. Chloe continued. I can't bring him back, but I can make sure their victims have somewhere safe to go. Hyung stepped back from the window. Monsters. She called them monsters. She'd called him a monster, even if she didn't know it. He walked back to his car, the knife wound in his side, aching with each step. Or maybe that was something else. Something deeper. He could protect her from distance. Keep the violence away from her door. Fund her clinic. Make sure she was safe. But he could never be part of her life. Because the moment she learned what he really was, not the scarred man from the ER, but the monster who controlled the very violence she'd dedicated her life to fighting, she would look at him the way everyone else did. With fear. With disgust. With the certainty that some people were beyond saving. Hyung got in his car and drove away. Behind him, Chloe finished with her patient, locked up the clinic, and felt the strange sensation that she was being watched. Protected. She couldn't explain why, but lately she'd started to feel less alone. The South Harbor crew noticed the gap in Hyung's territory before his own men did. 5 blocks around St. Catherine's Hospital, untouched. No collections, no recruitment, no presence. In an empire built on control, it was a glaring absence. Lee Sanghwa, head of the South Harbor Syndicate, stood in his office studying a map of Seoul with red pins marking Hyung Park's operations. One area remained conspicuously empty. Find out why, he told his lieutenant. It took 3 days. A doctor, American, ran a free clinic in the hospital basement. And Hyung Park, Seoul's most ruthless operator, had declared her neighborhood sacred ground. Lee smiled. Everyone had a weakness. Even devils. Chloe was closing the clinic when they arrived. 3 men, faces covered, moving with the casual confidence of people who knew no one would stop them. She'd locked the front door already, was turning off lights in the back room when she heard glass shatter. Her heart lurched. She reached for her phone. I wouldn't, a voice said. The largest man stood in the doorway, holding a metal pipe. Behind him, the others were methodically destroying everything, overturning shelves, smashing equipment, spray painting symbols on the walls. We're not here for you, doctor, the man said. We're here to deliver a message. Get out. Chloe's voice shook, but she held her ground. This is a medical facility. People need to understand that Seoul's monster has gone soft. He stepped closer. You know Hyung Park? The name hit her like cold water. I treated him once. I'm a doctor. I treat everyone. Maybe. The man tilted his head. Or maybe you're the reason the great Hyung Park suddenly cares about keeping one neighborhood clean. The reason he's forgotten what fear looks like. Behind him, someone kicked over her supply cabinet. Medications scattered across the floor, antibiotics, painkillers, insulin. Thousands of dollars worth of medicine she'd stretched her budget to afford. Stop, Chloe said. Please. These people have nothing to do with. That's the point. The man leaned the pipe against his shoulder. Tell Park that if he wants to play protector, he should remember what he's protecting. Next time, we won't be so gentle. They left through the broken door. Chloe stood alone in the wreckage, phone clutched in her hand, and felt the pieces click into place with sickening clarity. The donations, the sudden safety, the way gang members avoided her streets. Hyung Park hadn't just been grateful. He'd been protecting her. And now she was a target. Hyung got the call at 3 a.m. They hit the clinic, Min-jae said, voice tight. South Harbor crew. Dr. Williams is fine, but they made their point. Hyung was already moving. How bad? Total loss. They destroyed everything. He drove too fast through empty streets, trying to outrun the sick feeling in his gut. This was what he'd feared. What he'd known would happen eventually. Love, even the shadow of it, was a weapon in his world. The clinic was worse than he'd imagined. Broken glass, overturned furniture, obscene messages painted on walls. and Chloe, sitting on the floor surrounded by scattered pills, trying to sort them back into bottles with shaking hands. She looked up when he entered. "You," she said. No surprise in her voice. Just tired certainty. "Are you hurt?" "No." She set down a bottle of antibiotics. They were very clear that I wasn't the target. I was the message. Hyung crouched beside her, careful not to touch. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "Protecting me." Her laugh was bitter. "I was so stupid. I thought maybe someone just, I don't know, cared about healthcare access. About keeping people safe." She met his eyes. "But it was you. You made me a target just by existing near me." "Yes." The simple honesty of it seemed to deflate her anger. She looked around the destroyed clinic, at months of work reduced to rubble. "What do they want?" she asked quietly. "To hurt me. Through you." "Why?" "Because you're the only thing in this city I've cared about in 10 years. The words left his mouth before he could stop them. "And in my world, caring about something is the same as painting a target on it." Chloe stared at him. "I can't do this. I can't be the reason more violence happens. David died because I was too blind to see the danger. I won't." Her voice cracked. "I won't let someone else die because of me. You won't have to." Something in his tone made her look up sharply. But Hyung was already standing, already moving toward the door, already making the only choice that made sense. He had to die. Not literally. He wasn't quite that noble. But Hyung Park, the scarred devil of soul, had to cease to exist. Had to be erased so completely that targeting Chloe would be pointless. He'd survived fire once. He could survive disappearing. The news broke 36 hours later. Crime boss Hyung Park assassinated in territorial dispute. The details were perfect because Hyung had orchestrated them himself. A staged ambush, a burned car, a body too charred to identify conclusively but matching his dental records. Records he'd falsified years ago for exactly this contingency. Min Jae had protested. His other lieutenants had argued. But Hyung had been absolute. "Dissolve the organization. Distribute the territory. I'm done. Boss, if you're doing this for that doctor. I'm doing this because staying alive makes her a target. Are we clear?" They were clear. Seoul's underworld erupted into chaos within hours. Power vacuum, territorial disputes, old grudges resurfacing. Hyung watched it on the news from a safe house across the city, feeling nothing. He'd built an empire on fear. He was dismantling it for love. The irony wasn't lost on him. Chloe heard about his death in the hospital cafeteria. Someone had left a newspaper on her table. She'd picked it up absently, still exhausted from a double shift, and there it was. His name, his photo. The one the media always used, where his scars were most visible, and the word deceased. Her coffee cup slipped from her hand. "Dr. Williams?" A nurse was at her side. "Are you okay?" She wasn't okay. She'd treated hundreds of patients. Lost dozens. Death was part of her profession. A constant companion she'd learned to compartmentalize. But this felt different. This felt like losing something she hadn't known she wanted until it was gone. That evening, she returned to the clinic. It was still destroyed. She hadn't had time to clean it yet, hadn't found the energy to face the wreckage. But now she stood among the broken glass and overturned shelves. Hyung's newspaper photo clutched in her hand, and felt grief settle in her chest like stone. He'd protected her. Hidden in shadows, kept danger away, funded her dreams without asking for recognition. And she called people like him monsters. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the empty room. But sorry wasn't enough. Because somewhere beneath the grief, underneath the shock, a small voice was asking, what if he's not dead? What if this was protection of a different kind? Chloe looked at the ruined clinic, at the life she'd built from guilt and penance, and realized she was tired of safety. Tired of running from anything that felt like hope. If Hyung Park was dead, she wanted to mourn him properly. And if he wasn't, she was going to find him and make him explain why he thought dying was easier than letting someone love him. Chloe started with the donations. Anonymous transfers were never truly anonymous. Someone had to authorize them, route them, sign off on the paperwork. She spent 3 nights after her shifts tracing bank transfers, calling in favors from colleagues who knew people who knew people. The money led to a shell company. The shell company led to another, and another. But shell companies had to exist somewhere, registered by someone. And the deeper Chloe dug, the more inconsistencies she found. A death certificate filed too quickly. Dental records that didn't match hospital intake forms from his ER visit, She'd pulled his file, checked. A body cremated within 24 hours despite ongoing gang investigations. Seoul's underworld had accepted Hyung Park's death immediately. No one questioned it. That alone made her suspicious. Men like him, powerful, paranoid, meticulous, didn't die in simple ambushes. They had contingencies, escape routes, plans within plans. And then she found the property deed. A small apartment in Busan, purchased 3 months ago through the same labyrinth of shell companies that had funded her clinic. Owned by a corporation that didn't exist on paper, but had somehow paid cash. Chloe booked a train ticket before she could second-guess herself. The apartment was in a quiet neighborhood near the beach. The kind of place where people minded their own business and strangers went unnoticed. She found it on the 3rd floor of a modest building, standing outside the door with her heart hammering. This was insane. He could actually be dead. She could be chasing ghosts, seeing patterns where there was only grief. She knocked anyway. Silence. Then footsteps. Slow, cautious. The door opened. Hyung Park stood in the doorway, very much alive, staring at her like she was the ghost. He'd changed. Cut his hair shorter, traded expensive suits for plain clothes. But the scars were the same, and so were his eyes, dark and guarded and completely shocked. How did you? Chloe pushed past him into the apartment. Small, sparse, temporary. The home of someone who didn't plan to stay. The donations led to shell companies. The shell companies led to property records. The property records led here. She turned to face him. You're not very good at disappearing. I didn't think anyone would look. Then you're an idiot. Anger surged through her, hot and cleansing. You staged your death. Let the entire city think you were murdered. Let me think. Her voice cracked. You didn't even say goodbye. Hyung closed the door quietly. I couldn't. Why? Because you would have tried to stop me. You're damn right I would have. Chloe stepped closer. You don't get to decide my life for me. You don't get to play hero and martyr and protector without asking me what I want. What you want? His voice rose. You want to be safe. You want to run your clinic without gang violence destroying it. You want to save people without becoming a target yourself. What I want, Chloe said, voice shaking, is the truth. Not protection. Not safety. The truth. The truth is I'm poison. Hyung's hands clenched at his sides. Everything I touch gets destroyed. My mother died in the fire that scarred me. Everyone who gets close to me either leaves or dies. You were starting to, he stopped. You were starting to look at me like I was human. And I couldn't let that continue because the moment you cared, you became a target. So you chose for me. Yes. You decided I was safer mourning a dead man than knowing a living one. Yes. Chloe laughed bitterly. You know what David used to say? My fiancé, the one who died. He said I had a savior complex. That I treated people's pain like it was mine to fix. She moved closer. He was right. I saw warning signs, late nights, strange calls, connections to dangerous people. I ignored them because I thought my love could protect him. And when he died, I spent 2 years punishing myself for being too arrogant to see what was right in front of me. Hyung's expression shifted. Chloe, I work in the most dangerous district in Seoul because I think I deserve the danger. I take every shift, every patient, every impossible case because if I save enough people, maybe I can balance the scales. Maybe I can forgive myself for choosing career over caution, ambition over attention. Her eyes burned. But you know what I learned? Punishment doesn't bring people back. It just makes you hollow. Then why are you here? Hyung asked quietly. Because I'm tired of letting fear make my choices. She closed the distance between them. You think you're protecting me by disappearing. But you're just deciding I'm not strong enough to choose you despite the danger. You're making the same decision everyone made about you after the fire. That the damage was too much, that you weren't worth the risk. Something cracked in his expression. I saw your scars, Chloe said. That first night in the ER, I saw them. Do you know what I thought? He shook his head. I thought he survived. Whatever fire caused that, he lived through it. That's not monstrosity. That's strength. She reached up, slowly, and touched the scarred side of his face. He flinched but didn't pull away. You think you should have died in that fire. You think you're some mistake that kept breathing. But I look at you and see someone who survived the worst thing imaginable and built a life anyway. A life built on violence, Hyung said roughly. A life you're trying to leave behind. Her hand stayed gentle on his cheek. I'm not naive. I know what you were, what you did. But I also know you funded my clinic, protected my patients, and staged your own death to keep me safe. Those aren't the actions of a monster. They're the actions of someone trying desperately to be good. Chloe. Her name sounded broken in his mouth. I don't know how to be what you need. I don't need you to be anything except honest. She met his eyes. I chose you, Hyung. Not because you protected me. Not because you're trying to atone. But because when you looked at me in that convenience store, you saw someone as lonely as you were. And that matters more than safety. For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then his hand came up to cover hers where it rested against his scarred face. I've spent my whole life being feared, he said quietly. Being needed for what I could do, what I could control. No one's ever just wanted me. I want you. The words hung between them, simple and devastating. Hyung pulled her close, carefully, like he was afraid she might break or disappear. Chloe wrapped her arms around him and felt him shake. Not from fear, from relief. I don't know how to do this, he admitted against her hair. Neither do I. She pulled back to look at him. But I'm tired of running from anything that feels like hope. And you broke and scared, trying so hard to be better. You feel like hope. Hyung touched her face with the kind of reverence reserved for miracles. I'll have to dismantle everything. Cooperate with authorities. There will be trials, testimonies. My name will be dragged through. I know. You'll be associated with. I know. Chloe. He searched her face. Why? She smiled, tired and true. Because love isn't supposed to be safe. It's supposed to be worth it. For the first time in 10 years, Hyung Park let himself be chosen. Not feared. Not needed. Wanted. And realized that love wasn't his weakness. It was the only way out. The prosecutor's office was smaller than Hyung expected. He sat across from a woman half his age who looked at him like he was a particularly complicated math problem. Behind her, boxes of evidence were stacked to the ceiling. Years of investigations into his organization, all suddenly irrelevant now that he was handing them everything. You understand what you're offering, she said. It wasn't a question. Complete testimony against every operation I ran or had knowledge of. Names, locations, financial records, everything. Hyung slid a USB drive across the desk. In exchange for immunity on nonviolent offenses and reduced sentencing on the rest. She picked up the drive like it might explode. Why? Because I want to stop running. The prosecutor studied him. The scars, the expensive suit he'd worn deliberately to remind her who he'd been. The calm resignation in his voice. You'll still serve time, she said finally. Even with cooperation. The things you've done. I know. Hyung met her eyes. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Just a chance to make the rest of my life count for something other than fear. She nodded slowly. We'll be in touch. Outside, Chloe was waiting on a bench, reading a medical journal she probably wasn't absorbing. She looked up when he emerged, searching his face. How did it go? 3 to 5 years, probably. If the testimony goes well. He sat beside her. Maybe less. And if it doesn't, then more. Chloe took his hand. We'll figure it out. The simple certainty in her voice still shocked him. 2 months since she'd found him in Busan, and he still wasn't used to being chosen. The clinic reopens next week, she said. The contractors finished yesterday. Hyung had funded the renovation openly this time. His name on the checks, his face in the meetings with hospital administrators. The whispers had started immediately. Seoul's devil funding a free clinic. The monster pretending to be human. Let them whisper. He was done hiding. The clinic's reopening drew a crowd. News cameras, curious onlookers, patients who depended on Chloe's care and were relieved to have it back. Hyung stood near the back, trying to be invisible. It didn't work. People recognized him. Some left immediately. Others stared, phones out, capturing the moment Seoul's most notorious criminal stood in a medical clinic like he belonged there. You don't have to stay, Chloe said quietly, appearing at his side. I know this is. I'm staying. She squeezed his hand. The hospital director gave a speech about community health care and second chances that felt pointed. Chloe cut the ribbon, and the clinic officially reopened. Bigger than before, better equipped, legally funded and protected. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed, an elderly woman approached Hyung. He recognized her vaguely. One of Chloe's regulars, someone he'd seen during his surveillance months ago. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she bowed deeply. Thank you, she said in Korean. My grandson was caught in your territory war 3 years ago. Lost his leg. She straightened. I hated you. Prayed you'd burn in hell. Hyung said nothing. What could he say? But Dr. Williams told me you're the reason this clinic exists. The reason we have medicine, equipment, safety. The woman's eyes were wet. I don't forgive you. I can't. But I'm grateful anyway. And I hope you spend the rest of your life earning that gratitude. She walked away. Chloe appeared at his side again. You okay? I don't know. Hyung watched the woman disappear into the crowd. I destroyed that kid's life. And his grandmother thanked me. She thanked you for trying to be better. That's different. Chloe touched his arm. You can't undo the past. You can only build something different going forward. What if it's not enough? Then you keep building anyway. 3 months later, Hyung testified in court. The trial was public, sensational, exactly as brutal as he'd expected. Cameras everywhere, reporters shouting questions, his face, scarred and unmistakable. On every news channel, he told the truth. All of it. The protection rackets, the smuggling, the violence he'd ordered or allowed. Names, dates, details that would dismantle what remained of his organization and implicate dozens of others. His former lieutenants stared at him with betrayal and rage. Hyung stared back and felt nothing but relief. This was the price of freedom. Not just from prison, but from the life he'd built in the fire's aftermath. The empire constructed from fear because fear was easier than hope. The sentence came down. 4 years, reduced for cooperation and nonviolent record in recent years. Chloe was in the courtroom when they read it. She didn't smile. There was nothing to smile about. But she nodded, and that was enough. The night before Hyung was scheduled to begin his sentence, they walked through the neighborhood around St. Catherine's. It was late, the streets mostly empty except for the usual nighttime population. Shift workers, insomniacs, people for whom 2 a.m. was just another hour. For years, Chloe said. All right, visit when they allow it. You don't have to. She stopped walking and turned to face him. We're past that. You don't get to protect me from my own choices anymore. Just checking. They continued walking. Past the clinic. Past the convenience store where they'd had their first real conversation. Past streets that used to know him as Monster and now just knew him as the man who walked beside Dr. Williams. Some people still stared. Some still whispered. Hyung didn't hide his face anymore. What will you do? He asked. While I'm. Run the clinic. Expand it, maybe. We got another donation last week from someone who heard about the reopening. Chloe smiled slightly. Apparently reformed criminals are good publicity. I'm not reformed. I'm just different. You're trying. That's what matters. They reached a small park overlooking the Han River. Chloe sat on a bench, and Hyung joined her, their shoulders touching. I spent 10 years believing I should have died in that fire, Hyung said quietly. That my survival was some cosmic mistake. That the best I could do was become something so terrifying that no one would ever get close enough to see the damage. And now I think maybe I survived for this. Not the empire. Not the power. This. He gestured vaguely at the city, at her, at the space between what he'd been and what he might become. A chance to build something that doesn't require fear. Chloe leaned her head against his shoulder. 4 years will pass. And when you get out, we'll keep building. You really believe that? I have to. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this? They sat in silence, watching the city lights reflect off the river. Hyung had spent his life being many things: victim, survivor, monster, devil, criminal. He'd been feared, avoided, whispered about in rooms he'd never entered. But sitting here, with Chloe's weight warm against his side and the future spreading uncertain before them, he was something he'd never been before. Wanted. Not for power or protection. Not because fear demanded it or money bought it. Simply wanted. Simply chosen. A scarred man no one wanted had finally found someone willing to see past the fire. And in that seeing, he'd found something more valuable than empires or fear or the walls he'd spent a lifetime building. He'd found a way forward. Hyung took Chloe's hand, rough and scarred as it was, and held on. The city kept moving around them. Indifferent, relentless, full of people running from their pasts or toward their futures. For the first time in 10 years, Hyung Park wasn't running at all. He was simply here. Present. Alive. Finally free.